Right, so Gary Lineker quits the BBC, though few people, I imagine, who, having praised Lineker for his outspokenness on the matter of Israel and Gaza, a rare voice from within the BBC in doing so as he has been, and arguably being a former footballer, having done very well out of that, I dare say, won't have exactly thought he's gone without being somewhat pushed. Many at the BBC might not have the security to be able to do what he's done, knowing that it likely risked their jobs. So when every rancid UK news outlet going seemingly cheers the fact that he has quit because he did something they could definitely point to as wrong, it smacks far more of the BBC being handed the opportunity to push Lineker out of the door, but giving him the option of walking rather than being sacked. It's given the Israel lobbyists a chance to cry foul and play the victim card once again, though the hypocrisy doesn't take much effort to prove. It's had Zionists lambasting Lineker for talking about things they claim he doesn't understand. But we're all observers of this genocide. We all see it every day in our social media feeds, what is happening, and so much of that Lineker highlights, the BBC itself omits day after day. Their moral cowardice not missed by a lot of us too. Their failure to inform us. Their failure by their own charter, therefore. Lineker made a mistake at the end, which he apologised for, but saying sorry never counts for anything anymore, does it? The BBC owes this country a bigger apology, but by letting Lineker go, it just tells us it isn't coming.
It's the worst thing I've seen in my lifetime. I've seen so many images of children that, I've got no skin in this game. I'm not Muslim. I'm not Jewish. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Palestinian. So I see it, I think, purely from the outside, as from a neutral perspective. And I can't think of anything that I've seen worse in my lifetime. The constant images of children losing their lives day in, day out. Now, obviously, we all know what, October 7th happened and, the Hamas thing. But the minute you raise your voice against what they're now doing there, you get accused of being a supporter of Hamas or, all this kind of stuff. So there is, there's a lot of heavy lobbying on people to be quiet. So I understand why most people refrain, but I'm getting on a bit now. I'm fairly secure, and I can't be silent about what's happening there. I think it's so utterly awful. And now they're talking about, it already looks like it's happening, going into Rafah, where they've sent everybody down there. So, I don't think you can be, it's not anti-Semitic to say that what Israel is doing is wrong. And I just can't see how everybody doesn't see it that way now. For whatever the cause, whatever started it, and we all know that the history of this area of the world goes way before October the 7th. But it's truly dreadful what's happening, and I cry on a regular basis when I see certain images on social media.
Right, so that was Gary Lineker there talking to Mehdi Hassan and saying what thousands of us have probably told ourselves and been telling ourselves for quite some time. We've never seen anything like it before. Our media having always shielded us in the West from such imagery as we've seen in Gaza. What has been done and is still being done to these people by Israel. Most of us watching are not Israeli, are not Palestinian, are not Jewish or Muslim. But we are human. And I would actually argue that we here in the UK, responsible as we are, as this nation is for the creation of Israel in a land that was not ours to give away, we are more than entitled to condemn what has been done as part of our own history as well, even if we are only observing from afar. Because what we are observing has been a genocide playing out live in real time for us all to see for the first time ever. I think it's important that people abroad, people in the Middle East especially, realise we in the West, we simply have never seen this before. We have never seen this happening. Because media outlets simply don't show it to us. Until social media, we just didn't see this sort of stuff. October 7th, sure, Hamas should be condemned for that incursion, and an investigation carried out not by Israel into that is still needed. But it doesn't excuse what Israel have done since. Now conducting an operation to just plain seize Gaza wholesale now. Arguably the plan from the beginning. But rescue hostages and defeat Hamas, they have failed at, and all the more starkly when both of those were sat on the negotiating table as options for them. It's never been about that. It's only ever been about the land and the displacement of the Palestinian people of Gaza. Instead of saying that, though, the BBC calls out and punishes those who actually do instead. For over 19 months, the world has borne witness to the unrelenting bombardment of Gaza by Israel, a campaign widely described by all manner of observers and legal experts and human rights advocates as a genocide. The devastation, live streamed in real time across social media platforms every single day for 19 months, has left hundreds and thousands of civilians displaced, maimed or killed. And yet throughout this humanitarian catastrophe, the BBC's coverage has remained muted or distorted or overly sympathetic to the Israeli narrative. Lineker is a high-profile media personality with a massive following, and unlike the BBC, a moral backbone, emerged as a rare voice calling it out from within the BBC. Therefore, his was a voice that was increasingly incompatible with the BBC's editorial culture. His card was marked, probably quite a while ago. The immediate trigger for Lineker's departure, though, was a single post on social media that he had shared a video which included an emoji of a rat, which, unbeknownst to him, was an anti-Semitic trope. It reflected Nazi propaganda against Jews. But it was a mistake he promptly acknowledged and for which he publicly apologised. But of course, saying sorry is never enough. It's okay for Israel to invoke such stuff, though, isn't it? In 2023, nobody's talking about this one, but here it is. In 2023, there was an abhorrently genocidal song released by Israeli group Nessun Still called Charbu Darbu, which contained lyrics referring to Palestinians as rats and Amalek, and called for the IDF to eliminate outspoken pro-Palestine supporters Bella Hadid, Dua Lipa and Mia Khalifa. Hypocrisy doesn't get very far, though, does it? Apologies are never enough, though. They rarely ever are when it comes to Israel. The mere whiff of criticism towards Israel presented in a way that can be turned back on the person saying or posting, and the pariah state or their supporters will paint you as the pariah instead. And Lord knows we've seen years of this now, even before October 7th, didn't we? It doesn't cut through so much now. Eyes have been opened, and people are more openly talking about it, and people like Lineker doing that inspires courage in others to say what they are thinking too. The broader political establishment, the pro-Israel lobbies, complicit media apparatus still attempt to conflate critique of Israeli policy with anti-Semitism itself, erasing the vast distinction between the two. Lineker, who had long drawn the ire of the pro-Israel lobby for his outspoken views on Gaza, was, in their eyes, already a marked man. This latest anti-Semitism controversy merely provided the pretext to finally give him the push. I think, despite the fact that he's held his hands up and he's quit, I don't think there's many of us that don't think he's being pushed out here. The saga surrounding Lineker's departure is, of course, all part of a dangerous trend in UK media where, despite everything we are seeing on social media and in independent media who aren't afraid to talk about it, the prioritisation of Zionist sensitivities over humanitarian reality just remains. The BBC's fixation on the semantics of Lineker's post, endlessly dissected by media outlets like The Telegraph or The Spectator, contrasts sharply with its deafening silence over far more serious statements and actions. An example of this would be the recent comments made by Israeli Knesset member Zvi Sukkot on Israel's Channel 12. Sukkot being a member of Bezalel Smotrich's religious Zionism party, in case you're not aware of this guy. In a chilling moment of televised indifference, Sukkot stated just 2 days ago, in relation to a story of draft legislation that was being discussed on the show and not what Israel was doing in Gaza, that the reason for that was the change in priorities. And the reason for the change of priorities was because everybody got used to the idea that you can kill 100 Gazans in one night in a war and nobody in the world cares. You are gravely wrong, you depraved little minion. But not a whisper of condemnation from the BBC followed to largely inform you all about this story. They didn't cover it at all. Thankfully, it is something independent outlet SKWAWKBOX very much did, so check out their story on it. But why the double standard, though? Why does a poorly worded post from a football presenter attract more scrutiny than televised boasting of mass killing at the BBC? Because the former threatens vested interests and the latter does not. The structural bias at the BBC is not speculative anymore. It is observable. We've been watching it for long enough. We're turning off as a result of it. The composition of its leadership and editorial team reflects a worrying ideological position, which has been criticised time after time, but hasn't shifted. And all when it comes down to the coverage of Israel. Robbie Gibb, a member of the BBC's board, has known affiliations to the Jewish Chronicle, a publication fiercely supportive of Israel and notoriously hostile to Palestinian advocacy. Gibb's position on the BBC board as a consequence of that has long raised questions about the impartiality of the BBC's reporting. Rafi Berg is another key figure, currently controls the BBC's output on everything related to Israel and Palestine. Here's an excerpt from the Cradle on this chap. This guy's entire job is to water down everything that's too critical of Israel, one former BBC journalist said. Another BBC journalist said Berg plays a key role in a broader BBC culture of systematic Israeli propaganda. How much power he has is wild, said another journalist. There was an extreme fear at the BBC that if you ever wanted to do anything about Israel or Palestine, editors would say, if you want to pitch something, you have to go through Rafi and get his sign-off, another journalist explained. In one case, Berg downplayed Amnesty International's accusation that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Berg chose a headline that stated, Israel rejects fabricated claims of genocide, to describe the Amnesty report, and failed to post the story for 12 hours after it was written to suppress its online reach. Berg's editorial influence has become synonymous with the BBC's increasingly diluted and equivocal coverage of events in Gaza. This sanitisation of war crimes under the guise of balanced reporting, as the BBC bleats about ad nauseum, has led many to question the corporation's journalistic integrity. More and more people are turning off as a result. Given this context, it becomes easier to understand why Lineker therefore had to go. His consistent and high-profile critique of Israel, particularly on social media, where the BBC has long tried to police its presenters' personal conduct, was totally incompatible with that editorial orthodoxy that was being enforced at the highest levels. Amongst the most egregious hit pieces on Lineker, though, came from The Spectator, whose contributor, Jonathan Sacerdoti, wrote that Lineker should educate himself about the Nazis, a cynical reframing of an apology that he'd already given. Sacerdoti's role is far from impartial, though, and I've spoken about this guy before. A former director of public affairs at the Zionist Federation, his writing aligns with that broader agenda of silencing critics of Israel through character assassination and guilt by association. That The Spectator is also chaired by former BBC heavyweight Andrew Neil, that ran such a piece as this, is indicative of the revolving door between elite media and ideologically driven commentary. Meanwhile, the campaign against anti-Semitism, which has long held Lineker in its crosshairs, capitalised on this controversy to advance their vendetta as well. Rather than engage in good faith dialogue about the differences between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, they just continue to conflate the two instead. It's no exaggeration to say that the BBC's treatment of Lineker exemplifies a moral failing of the highest order. While the mainstream and far too pro-Israel media obsesses over one erroneous post, which was apologised for, children continue to be killed in Gaza. Entire families are wiped out. Hospitals are targeted, and food and medical supplies are deliberately withheld, all in broad daylight, day after day, going unreported all the time. The BBC is one of the most blatant for this, and we can see why. Instead, the Beeb focuses on policy, policing tone, language, perceived offence, as if these are greater threats than a literal genocide. Lineker's voice is shared by millions now, has been one of the few prominent voices in the public eye, echoing what many of us have been seeing. The injustice, the inhumanity, the moral bankruptcy of silence. Therefore, his departure, forced as many of us will see this, it's not just a professional matter, it's a cultural one. It signals to journalists and public figures alike that moral clarity on Palestine is incompatible with institutional longevity, particularly in organisations like the BBC, which appear either too afraid or too complicit to confront Israel's actions head-on. Ironically, much of the media commentary following Lineker's departure has attempted to reframe him, and by extension his supporters, as somehow naive or radicalised or misinformed. A particularly condescending piece in the Irish Independent described men like Lineker as endlessly pontificating on issues they don't understand. Yet it is not ignorance that drives public outrage, it is the very opposite. We are not radicalised by propaganda, we are radicalised by reality. The camera doesn't lie. We all have eyes. We all have ears. We see the corpses being pulled from the rubble. We hear the bombs falling on homes on news reports in independent media or via social media. We don't need the Telegraph or the Spectator or even the BBC to tell us what we are all witnessing. and that what we're witnessing is a crime against humanity. And we certainly don't need sanctimonious lectures from media elites to remind us of how complicated it is. And you shouldn't worry your pretty little heads about such things. Take our word for it. The moral clarity of genocide is not complicated, but it is unbearable. Gary Lineker's exit from the BBC is not the end of his career. It's the beginning of a reckoning, I fancy. His departure exposes the rot within British media institutions, the cowardice of journalistic elites, and the brutal effectiveness of pro-Israel lobbying and silencing dissent, because they got their man in the end. But it also ignites a deeper conversation about where we stand as a society. Will we continue to accept a reality in which criticising a genocidal war ends up being more controversial than the war itself? Will we allow powerful media organisations to prioritise reputational management over moral responsibility? Will we continue to equate solidarity with Palestine with anti-Semitism whilst ignoring the very real suffering of millions? Gary Lineker may no longer present match of the day, but he's done something far more valuable. He's exposed the price of truth in an age of complicity. And so I offer my full solidarity to him and wish him all the best for the future. Another issue the mainstream media are conspicuously silent on is the matter of RAF Akrotiri. And when one of Labour's own MPs happens to ask a question about whether or not Israel themselves happen to be using that base, the request got blocked by her own government. What are they hiding then? And why is no mainstream media asking any questions about this? Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, in which case. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.